One day you wake up and realize something deeply uncomfortable. You've spent most of your life recovering from work, recovering on weekends, recovering at night, recovering during vacations that never feel long enough, recovering emotionally from a life that keeps demanding more energy than it gives back. And maybe the strangest part is how normal this has become. People laugh about being exhausted now. They joke about burnout. They celebrate being booked and busy, as if constantly feeling drained is proof that life is finally moving in the right direction. But I don't think human beings were designed to live this way. I think many people have simply adapted to a life that slowly disconnected them from themselves. You can see it everywhere. People waking up already tired, people staring blankly at their phones before work because they need a few more minutes before facing another day they don't even feel emotionally connected to anymore. People counting down to Friday while secretly wondering why life keeps moving faster but feeling emptier at the same time. And the dangerous part is that nobody really stops to question it. Because when exhaustion becomes normal, survival starts disguising itself as success. For a long time, I believed this was simply adulthood. I believed being tired meant I was building something meaningful. I believed sacrificing all my time would eventually lead to freedom. I believed if I stayed disciplined long enough, one day life would finally open up and feel worth all the pressure. But eventually, I started noticing something disturbing. Many people work harder every year, yet feel less alive every year. They earn more money, but have less energy. More responsibilities, but less clarity. More distractions, but less purpose. And slowly, I realized the problem wasn't only financial. It was psychological. Most people are not just selling their labor. They are selling their attention, their mornings, their creativity, their peace of mind, their health, their relationships, their ability to dream, piece by piece, year after year. Not because they're weak, but because modern life quietly teaches people to survive before it teaches them to live. From a young age, most people are trained to become useful long before they learn how to become free. Study hard, get a stable job, stay realistic, avoid risk, be responsible, keep going no matter how exhausted you feel. And if you follow that script long enough, eventually you stop asking bigger questions. Questions like, what kind of life do I actually want? What would freedom genuinely look like for me? Why does my life feel emotionally smaller the older I get? Am I truly living or just maintaining myself? I think one of the saddest things about modern adulthood is watching people slowly lose their relationship with possibility. Not because they lack intelligence or potential, but because survival mode consumes imagination. When all your energy goes into making it through the week, you stop believing your future can become something bigger than repetition. And that is where many people get trapped for decades. Not inside dramatic suffering, inside comfortable exhaustion, inside routines that slowly drain meaning from their lives, while rewarding them just enough to stay obedient to the cycle. But the people who eventually escape this pattern usually realize something earlier than everyone else. Freedom does not begin when you make more money. Freedom begins the moment you stop treating your life like something cheap. Because one day, you will look back and understand something that changes everything. You were never just selling your time. You were selling pieces of your life. One short note, and then we begin. You've just heard where we're going. Before Chapter 1, here's how the next hour will run. We don't run ad breaks inside these recordings. Audiobook Rise isn't in the YouTube partner program, so nothing gets inserted in the middle of a chapter. No commercial cutting across an idea while you're still holding it. From here to the final line, it's the narration and you. That's not free to do. Every recording takes hours of writing, narration, and editing, and we publish 2 to 3 of them a week. So if this channel has given you something worth keeping, you can support the work on Ko-fi. That's Ko-Fi at ko-fi.com/audiobookrise. The link is in the description below. Any amount helps. None is expected. And if you'd rather just listen, then listen. That's what this was built for. Thank you for your time. It's the one thing you can't get back. Now, settle in. Chapter 1. The most dangerous trap is the one that feels safe. A man sits alone in his car after work. The parking lot is almost empty. The sky is getting darker, and for a few quiet minutes, he just stares forward without touching his phone, without turning on the radio, without moving at all. Not because something terrible happened that day. Nothing unusual happened. That's what makes it frightening. The meetings were normal. The emails were normal. The traffic was normal. The exhaustion was normal. He sits there because he needs a moment before walking inside and pretending he still has enough energy left to be a husband, a father, a human being. And whether people admit it or not, scenes like this happen everywhere, every single day. The most dangerous trap is rarely the one that destroys you immediately. It's the one that slowly becomes familiar. That's how people spend years disconnected from themselves without realizing it. Not through dramatic suffering, through repetition. Wake up, rush through the morning, work all day, come home exhausted. Distract yourself long enough to recover. Sleep. Repeat. At first you tell yourself it's temporary. You believe things will calm down eventually. You believe once you make a little more money, life will finally feel lighter. You believe all this pressure is building toward freedom. But then months pass, then years, and one day you quietly realize you became better at enduring life, but not better at enjoying it. I remember a period in my own life where every week felt emotionally identical. Monday already felt heavy before it even started. Wednesday felt like survival. Friday wasn't exciting anymore. It was recovery. And Sundays became the worst part. Not because anything bad happened on Sundays, but because deep down, I could already feel Monday waiting for me. That feeling is more common than people think. Millions of people are not physically trapped. They are psychologically trapped. They live inside routines that slowly consume their energy, while convincing them this is simply what adulthood looks like. And after enough time, people stop questioning it. That's the real danger, because the human mind adapts to almost anything, even emotional exhaustion. Eventually, survival starts feeling normal. You stop asking, why does my life feel smaller every year? Instead, your entire focus becomes maintenance. Pay the bills, reply to messages, get through the week. Recover just enough to do it again, and slowly, awareness disappears. That's how people lose themselves. Quietly, not all at once, because survival mode changes the way people think. When your mind is constantly overwhelmed by stress, pressure, and exhaustion, your world becomes smaller. You stop imagining bigger possibilities. You stop exploring new versions of yourself. You stop taking emotional risks. Your brain shifts into survival efficiency. And survival efficiency is dangerous because society rewards it. People praise reliability, busyness, discipline, predictability. But almost nobody talks about the hidden emotional cost of living this way for too long. You begin confusing stability with fulfillment. Those are not the same thing. Someone can have a stable income, a stable schedule, a stable life, and still feel emotionally disconnected from their existence. Because human beings do not only need security, we also need meaning, growth, movement, ownership, emotional aliveness. Without those things, people slowly become numb. And numbness is deceptive, because numb people still look functional. They still go to work. They still smile politely. They still show up. Meanwhile, internally, they feel exhausted in ways they can't fully explain. I honestly think many adults secretly miss a version of themselves they lost years ago. The younger version, the curious version, the ambitious version, the version that once believed life could become something meaningful instead of repetitive. But adulthood slowly teaches people to shrink themselves, to be realistic, to stop dreaming so much, to prioritize safety over possibility. And eventually, many people stop trying to build a life they actually want. They simply learn how to survive the one they already have. That's why so many people feel restless late at night. even when everything looks fine on the surface. Because deep down, something inside them knows they were meant for more than emotional survival. I once heard someone say, "I don't even know what I'm excited about anymore." And honestly, that sentence stayed with me, because I realized how many people secretly feel the same way. Not broken, not hopeless, just disconnected. Modern life rarely destroys people dramatically. Instead, it slowly drains attention, creativity, energy, imagination, presence, until people become too exhausted to reconnect with themselves. And strangely enough, society often rewards this condition. The more exhausted you are, the more hard-working you appear, the less time you have for yourself, the more responsible you seem. The more pressure you tolerate, the more mature people think you are. But almost nobody asks the deeper question: what if the life you're maintaining is slowly destroying the person you could have become? That question changes everything. Because many people are not trapped by failure. They are trapped by comfort that became permanent. A predictable paycheck, a predictable routine, a predictable identity, safe enough to survive, but never expansive enough to truly feel alive. And over time, people begin sacrificing parts of themselves just to maintain stability. They sacrifice curiosity, health, creativity, dreams, peace of mind, all for a version of security that never actually feels secure. That's why some people secretly feel empty, even after achieving everything they were told to pursue. Because achievement without ownership still feels like dependence. You can feel it when someone no longer believes their future can change. They stop trying new things. They stop speaking with excitement. They stop imagining a different life. Repetition becomes identity, and identity becomes a prison. But one of the most important realizations a person can have is this: just because a lifestyle is common does not mean it is healthy, and just because exhaustion is normalized does not mean it is harmless. There are people who have spent so many years surviving that they no longer remember what feeling alive even feels like. That's why awareness matters, because the moment you begin questioning the cycle, you begin separating yourself from it. You begin realizing maybe adulthood was never supposed to feel like permanent recovery. Maybe life was not meant to be something you endlessly endure. Maybe the goal was never just to survive long enough to retire. Maybe the goal was to actually live before your time disappears. And once a person truly sees that, it becomes impossible to completely unsee it. Chapter 2. You're not just selling your time, you're losing yourself. There are people who work so much that they slowly lose the ability to imagine a different future. And that may be one of the cruelest things about modern life. Because exhaustion doesn't only drain the body, it drains vision. It drains ambition. It drains curiosity. It drains the emotional energy required to believe change is still possible. I once heard someone quietly say, "I'm too tired to change my life." And the strange thing was, they weren't lazy. They worked hard. They handled responsibilities. They showed up every day. But somewhere along the way, survival consumed so much of their energy that they no longer had enough left to dream. That sentence stayed in my mind for a long time, because I realized how many adults secretly feel the same way, not incapable, just depleted. Modern life has a way of keeping people mentally occupied every second of the day. Notifications, deadlines, bills, messages, stress, noise. And after enough years of constant stimulation, many people become so overwhelmed that silence itself starts feeling uncomfortable. That's why distraction becomes addictive. Not because people are weak, but because distraction temporarily helps them escape the emotional weight of their own lives. Scrolling becomes emotional anesthesia. Entertainment becomes recovery. Noise becomes avoidance. And little by little, people stop confronting the deeper questions sitting quietly underneath their routines. Questions like, why do I feel emotionally disconnected from my own life? When was the last time I truly felt excited about my future? Why does rest never feel enough anymore? Why do I constantly feel behind, no matter how hard I work? The frightening part is that many people don't even realize how much of their mental energy is being consumed every day. Because exhaustion feels invisible at first. It doesn't arrive dramatically. It accumulates slowly. One distracted day, one overstimulated evening, one exhausted week at a time, and eventually, people stop using their attention to build their future. They only use it to survive the present. That's when a person becomes emotionally trapped. Because where attention goes, life follows. If your attention constantly belongs to stress, distraction, comparison, survival, recovery, your future slowly becomes smaller. Not because you lack potential, but because potential requires sustained attention to grow. And most people no longer live in environments that protect deep focus. Everything competes for human attention now. Apps compete for it. Algorithms compete for it. Companies compete for it. Entire industries profit from keeping people distracted long enough to stop thinking deeply about their own lives. And honestly, I don't think most people realize how dangerous that becomes over time. Because a distracted person is easier to control, easier to influence, easier to manipulate, easier to exhaust. But a focused person becomes difficult to control. A focused person starts asking dangerous questions. Why am I living this way? Who benefits from my exhaustion? What kind of future am I actually building? What would happen if I stopped living entirely in survival mode? That's why protecting your attention is not just a productivity issue, it's an identity issue. I remember a period in my life where I constantly consumed information, but rarely created anything meaningful. Videos, social media, endless content, and for a while it felt harmless. But eventually I noticed something disturbing. My mind was becoming reactive instead of intentional. I was absorbing other people's thoughts all day, while neglecting my own future, and that realization hit harder than I expected. Because many people mistake stimulation for progress. But consuming constantly is not the same thing as growing. Being busy online is not the same thing as building a meaningful life. And distraction becomes especially dangerous when someone already feels emotionally unfulfilled. Because then distraction stops being entertainment. It becomes escape. People distract themselves from loneliness, anxiety, uncertainty, regret, dissatisfaction, not realizing the temporary escape is slowly stealing years from their future. And the worst part? The world normalizes this behavior. People spend entire evenings scrolling through other people's lives while ignoring their own. They consume motivation instead of taking action, consume information instead of building skills, consume entertainment instead of confronting reality. And eventually, distraction becomes identity. You become someone who always intended to change, but never fully committed to changing. That's why so many people feel stuck. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their attention is fragmented. And fragmented attention creates fragmented lives. Meanwhile, the people who eventually build freedom usually understand something earlier than everyone else. Attention is one of the most valuable forms of power in the modern world, because attention shapes habits, identity, skills, opportunities, future outcomes. Whatever repeatedly receives your focus eventually shapes your life. That's why highly intentional people protect their minds so aggressively. They understand that every distraction carries a hidden cost, not just lost time, lost momentum, lost clarity, lost potential. And over enough years, those losses become entire alternate futures that never happen. That realization is painful. Because many people are not failing because they are incapable. They are failing because their energy is constantly being consumed by environments designed to keep them mentally exhausted. And once exhaustion becomes identity, people stop believing they can escape it. They settle, not because they truly want to, but because survival slowly lowered their expectations for life. That's why awareness matters so much, because the moment you realize your attention is being stolen, you finally have the chance to reclaim it. And reclaiming your attention may be the first real step toward reclaiming your life. Chapter 3. The rich stopped selling their time. A long time ago, a man works 12 hours a day for nearly 15 years. He does everything people told him would eventually lead to freedom. He stays disciplined. He works overtime. He sacrifices weekends. He becomes dependable. And financially, his life improves. Bigger apartment, better car, more stability. From the outside, it looks like success. But one night, after hearing rumors about layoffs at work, he suddenly realizes something that terrifies him. If he stops working, everything stops. The income stops. The security stops. The lifestyle stops. And for the first time in years, a question quietly enters his mind. If I can never stop working, am I actually free? That question changes the way some people see the world forever, because most people grow up believing wealth comes from working harder. But if hard work alone created freedom, millions of exhausted people would already be financially free. The truth is more uncomfortable than that. The wealthy are not simply people who work harder. They are people who learned how to stop trading life directly for money. That is the difference. And once you see it, you begin noticing it everywhere. Most people live inside what is essentially a one-to-one survival equation. 1 hour worked equals 1 hour paid, which means their income is permanently connected to their physical presence. If they stop, the money stops. At first, that system feels normal, even safe. But over time, people begin realizing the hidden psychological cost of living this way. Because when your survival depends entirely on continuously selling your time, rest starts feeling dangerous. You become afraid of slowing down, afraid of uncertainty, afraid of losing momentum. And eventually, many people become emotionally trapped inside productivity itself. They don't know how to stop, because stopping feels unsafe. That's why so many adults secretly feel guilty when resting. Even during vacations, even during weekends, their nervous system has been conditioned to associate stillness with falling behind. And that's not freedom, that's dependency. The wealthy think differently, not because they are magically smarter, but because many of them eventually understand something most people never fully realize. Time is too valuable to be sold endlessly in small pieces. That realization changes behavior completely. Instead of only working harder, they begin asking different questions. How can this effort scale? How can this continue producing value without my constant presence? How can I build something instead of endlessly maintaining something? That is where leverage begins. Leverage is one of the most important ideas people rarely discuss deeply enough, because leverage allows effort to multiply. A person without leverage must constantly trade more life for more income. A person with leverage creates systems, assets, skills, or platforms that continue generating value long after the original effort was made. And once someone understands this difference, their entire relationship with work starts changing. They stop thinking only in hours. They start thinking in ownership. Ownership of skills, businesses, systems, investments, media, intellectual property, reputation, audience, long-term value. Because ownership creates options, and options are what freedom is made of. I remember a moment when I realized how deeply most people are conditioned to think only in labor. Someone asked, "How many hours does this pay?" Not, "What could this become over 5 years?" That mindset difference seems small at first, but over decades, it creates completely different lives. One person spends years renting out their energy. Another spends years building assets that eventually protect their energy. And the emotional difference between those two lives becomes enormous over time. Because people who rely entirely on labor often live with invisible pressure constantly sitting in the background. Pressure to keep going. Pressure to maintain income. Pressure to never slow down. Even success becomes exhausting when survival still depends on continuous performance. That's why many high-income people still feel trapped. Because money alone does not create freedom. Ownership does. Leverage does. The ability to disconnect your survival from your immediate labor does. And sadly, many people spend decades climbing careers without realizing they are still trapped inside the same psychological structure. More money, same dependency. More status, same exhaustion. More comfort, same lack of control over their time. That realization can feel painful at first, especially because modern culture glorifies overwork so aggressively. People admire burnout now. They admire constant hustle. They admire being busy every second of the day. But almost nobody asks, what kind of life is this pace actually creating? Because eventually, people begin sacrificing things that matter deeply. Health, presence, relationships, peace of mind, emotional stability, all while calling it ambition. But real wealth is not simply having more money. Real wealth is having greater control over your life. That's why some people with modest incomes feel freer than people making millions. Because freedom is psychological before it becomes financial. And one of the most powerful shifts a person can make is realizing the goal is not to work endlessly harder. The goal is to build a life where your survival no longer depends entirely on selling your time. That shift changes how people approach everything. They become more intentional about learning skills, building assets, protecting focus, creating long-term systems, thinking beyond immediate survival. Because once someone understands leverage, they stop viewing time casually. They begin understanding that every hour carries opportunity cost. Every year spent only maintaining survival is a year not spent building freedom. And eventually, people reach a point where they must choose between two paths. Continue renting out their life forever, or slowly begin building something that gives parts of that life back. That decision changes futures, because at the end of the day, the wealthiest people are not simply the people who earn the most. They are often the people who depend the least on constantly selling pieces of their existence just to survive. Chapter 4. Every distraction is quietly stealing your future. A man opens his phone for just 5 minutes before bed. An hour disappears, then another. By the time he finally puts the phone down, his mind feels heavy, restless, overstimulated. And strangely enough, he still feels empty. So he wakes up tired the next morning and repeats the same cycle again. At first, moments like this seem harmless. Everybody does it. Scrolling after work, watching endless videos, checking notifications every few minutes. Constant stimulation, constant noise. Modern life normalizes distraction so completely that most people never stop to ask what it's actually doing to their minds. But distraction is not neutral. Every distraction is training your brain to move away from discomfort instead of through it. And over enough years, that changes a person completely. I honestly think one of the biggest psychological problems of modern life is that people no longer know how to sit alone with their own thoughts. Silence feels uncomfortable now. Stillness feels unproductive. The moment boredom appears, people instantly reach for stimulation. Phone, music, social media, entertainment, anything to avoid feeling emotionally present. But here's the dangerous part. A distracted life can feel busy while secretly remaining empty, because distraction creates the illusion of movement without actual progress. You consume information, consume opinions, consume motivation, consume entertainment. Meanwhile, your real life stays exactly where it was. And eventually, many people become trapped inside cycles of passive consumption. They watch other people build businesses. Other people get healthier. Other people become disciplined. Other people transform their lives, while secretly wondering why their own future never seems to move forward. The answer is painful, because deep down, many people are not protecting their attention anymore. They are surrendering it. And attention is far more valuable than most people realize. Because whatever repeatedly captures your attention eventually shapes your identity. If your attention constantly belongs to outrage, comparison, gossip, short-term pleasure, endless stimulation, your inner world slowly becomes chaotic. That chaos eventually spills into real life. You struggle to focus deeply. You struggle to commit consistently. You struggle to stay emotionally present long enough to build anything meaningful. And then people start believing something is wrong with them. But often, the problem is not lack of intelligence. It's overstimulation. Modern life floods people with more information in a single day than previous generations consumed in weeks. And the human nervous system was never designed for endless psychological input. That's why so many people feel mentally exhausted despite doing very little physically demanding work. Their minds never truly rest. Even during relaxation, stimulation continues. Notifications, videos, headlines, scrolling. The brain never fully slows down, and eventually, overstimulation weakens a person's ability to think long-term. That's one of the hidden costs nobody talks about enough. Because building a meaningful life requires depth of thought, depth of focus, depth of patience. But distraction trains the brain for speed instead of depth. Quick dopamine, quick entertainment, quick emotional escape. And the more addicted people become to immediate stimulation, the harder it becomes to tolerate the slow process of real growth. That's why many people struggle to stay committed to anything long enough to see meaningful results. Reading feels difficult. Deep work feels difficult. Discipline feels difficult. Not because they are incapable, but because their nervous system has been conditioned for constant novelty. I remember noticing this in my own life at one point. I could spend hours consuming content online without realizing how mentally scattered I felt afterward. My attention span became weaker. My thinking became shallower. My creativity became reactive instead of intentional. And what scared me most was how normal it felt. That's the real danger of distraction. It rarely feels destructive while it's happening. It feels entertaining, comfortable, temporary. But slowly, distraction steals clarity, momentum, discipline, emotional presence, future potential, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, until eventually years disappear, and many people wake up realizing they spent more time escaping life than building one. That realization hurts. Because human beings are capable of extraordinary transformation when attention is focused consistently in the right direction. Skills can be learned, bodies can change, careers can evolve, businesses can grow, lives can completely transform. But transformation requires sustained focus, and focus has become rare. That's why focused people often seem unusually powerful today, not because they possess magical abilities, but because they are no longer living in constant reaction to every distraction surrounding them. They protect their attention aggressively. They understand something most people ignore. A distracted mind rarely builds an intentional future. And intentional living is becoming increasingly rare in a world designed to fragment attention. Because distraction is profitable. If people remain distracted, they consume more, compare more, think less, question less, and stay emotionally dependent longer. That's why reclaiming your attention is deeper than self-improvement. It's personal freedom, the ability to choose where your mind goes instead of constantly surrendering it to external noise. And honestly, many people underestimate how life-changing that becomes. Because when your attention becomes intentional again, something powerful starts happening. Your thoughts become clearer, your emotions become calmer, your goals become more visible, your energy stops leaking into meaningless places, and slowly, you begin reconnecting with yourself again. Not the exhausted version, not the distracted version, the version underneath all the noise. The version that still wants more from life than endless consumption and survival. And maybe that's why protecting your attention matters so much. Because your future is shaped by whatever repeatedly receives your focus. Which means every distraction carries a hidden question. Is this helping you build a life or helping you escape from one? Chapter 5. Hard work alone will keep you average. A man spends 10 years doing everything correctly. He wakes up early. He stays late at work. He rarely complains. He sacrifices weekends. He becomes the person everyone describes as hard-working. And yet somehow, his life barely changes. Financially, he survives. Emotionally, he feels exhausted. Mentally, he feels stuck. Meanwhile, he watches other people move forward faster than him. People who don't seem to work nearly as hard. And deep down, a painful question begins growing inside him. Why does it feel like effort alone is no longer enough? That question frustrates many people, because from childhood, most of us were taught a very simple formula. Work hard and life will reward you. But adulthood eventually reveals a more uncomfortable truth. The world does not automatically reward effort. It rewards value, and those are not always the same thing. That realization can feel brutal at first, because many good people spend years exhausting themselves believing hard work alone guarantees freedom. But if effort alone created wealth, construction workers, nurses, factory employees, and exhausted parents working multiple jobs would already be among the wealthiest people alive. The reality is more complicated than that. Modern economies reward rare skills, leverage, influence, scalability, problem-solving, ownership, not simply suffering. And many people never fully realize this, because society romanticizes struggle. People admire being overworked now. They admire constant busyness, constant hustle, constant sacrifice. But almost nobody asks whether all that effort is actually building freedom, because sometimes people are not climbing upward. They are simply running harder inside the same cage. I remember realizing this during a period where I was constantly busy, but strangely stagnant at the same time. Every day felt productive, but my life wasn't truly expanding. That's when I began understanding something important. Being exhausted is not proof you are building a meaningful future. Sometimes it's only proof that your energy is being consumed inefficiently. That distinction changes everything. Because there's a difference between working hard and creating value that compounds over time. Most people stay trapped because they only increase effort. They never increase leverage. So their life becomes emotionally expensive to maintain. Everything depends on continuous labor, continuous pressure, continuous output, continuous exhaustion. And eventually, many people become trapped inside what looks like responsibility, but feels like quiet desperation. That's why replaceability matters so much. Because the more replaceable your work becomes, the less control you have over your future. Modern life changes quickly. Technology changes quickly. Markets change quickly. Industries change quickly. And people who never build unique value often remain financially fragile, no matter how hard they work. That sounds harsh, but avoiding that truth doesn't protect anyone from it. The market rarely asks, "How exhausted are you?" It asks, "What value do you create?" That's why highly valuable people often focus obsessively on growth. Not because they are obsessed with money, but because increasing value creates options, and options reduce dependency. A person with rare skills has more freedom. A person who communicates well has more opportunities. A person who solves difficult problems becomes harder to ignore. Meanwhile, people who remain easily replaceable often stay trapped in fear. Fear of losing income, fear of speaking honestly, fear of taking risks, fear of slowing down, because dependency quietly controls their decisions. And honestly, I think many people feel this pressure every day without fully admitting it to themselves. That constant low-level anxiety, if this disappears, what happens to me? That's not a peaceful way to live. And sadly, many people normalize it. They normalize chronic stress, normalize emotional burnout, normalize survival anxiety, all while telling themselves, this is just adulthood. But adulthood was never supposed to mean abandoning yourself entirely. One of the most powerful shifts a person can make is realizing your goal should not be to become useful everywhere. Your goal should be to become valuable somewhere. Because value changes how life responds to you. The world pays attention differently when your skills are rare, your thinking is clear, your discipline is consistent, Your presence creates impact. That's why self-development matters far beyond motivation. Learning deeply matters. Communication matters. Focus matters. Discipline matters. Not because they sound impressive online, but because they slowly reduce dependence. And reducing dependence changes a person psychologically. You become calmer, more intentional, less desperate for approval, less willing to tolerate environments destroying your peace. Because confidence grows naturally when you know you can create value anywhere. And maybe that's what many people are truly searching for. Not luxury, not status, just the ability to breathe without constantly fearing survival. That's real freedom. And freedom requires becoming someone difficult to replace. Not through ego, through depth. Depth of skill, depth of thinking, depth of discipline, depth of self-respect. Because eventually, life forces everyone to confront the same uncomfortable question. Are you building a future, or merely becoming more efficient at surviving the present? That question separates people. Some continue repeating the same exhausting cycles forever. Others begin rebuilding themselves intentionally, learning, growing, creating, becoming harder to ignore. Because once someone understands that hard work alone is not enough, they stop worshiping exhaustion and start building value instead. Chapter 6. Most people don't really want freedom. A man spends years complaining about his life. He complains about his job, his schedule, his stress, his lack of time, his exhaustion. And every few months he says the same thing. One day I'm going to change everything. But years pass. Nothing changes, not because he's incapable, not because he lacks intelligence, but because deep down he fears uncertainty more than he hates his current life. And that realization is uncomfortable, because many people say they want freedom, but what they actually want is comfort without discomfort, security without risk, growth without uncertainty, transformation without sacrifice. And life rarely works that way. Freedom sounds beautiful until it demands responsibility. That's the part people don't talk about enough. Because real freedom is psychologically heavy. When you stop blindly following systems, routines, and expectations, suddenly your life becomes your responsibility. Your choices matter more. Your discipline matters more. Your mindset matters more. And honestly, many people would rather remain emotionally dependent than face that pressure. Because dependency feels safe. Predictable paycheck, predictable routine, predictable identity. Even if the life itself feels emotionally draining, familiarity still comforts the nervous system. That's why so many people stay inside environments, slowly destroying them. Not because they love suffering, but because uncertainty terrifies them. I've seen people remain in jobs they hate, relationships draining them, routines making them miserable, lifestyles exhausting them, simply because the pain became familiar. And familiar pain often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. That's one of the strangest psychological patterns in human behavior. People adapt to almost anything if it becomes predictable long enough, even unhappiness. Eventually, they stop asking, "What would make me feel alive?" and start asking, "What can I tolerate?" That shift changes an entire life. Because once survival becomes your primary emotional standard, you slowly begin lowering expectations for yourself. You stop thinking about fulfillment. You stop thinking about meaning. You stop thinking about potential. You focus only on minimizing instability. And while stability matters, there's a dangerous point where protecting comfort begins destroying growth. I remember a period in my life where I realized I was making decisions almost entirely based on avoiding discomfort, avoiding failure, avoiding embarrassment, avoiding uncertainty. And from the outside, my life looked responsible. But internally, I felt stuck. Because deep down, I knew something difficult. A safe life can still become a small life. That realization forced me to confront something many people avoid for years. There's a difference between peace and stagnation. Real peace creates expansion. Stagnation slowly kills possibility while disguising itself as safety. And many people cannot tell the difference anymore. That's why some individuals spend decades waiting for the perfect time to change. The perfect time to start building, learn a skill, leave a toxic environment, pursue something meaningful, reclaim ownership over their life. But perfect certainty never arrives, because uncertainty is part of every meaningful transformation. And people who eventually build freedom usually accept that earlier than everyone else. They stop waiting to feel fully comfortable before taking action. They understand growth feels awkward, change feels unstable, reinvention feels emotionally uncomfortable. But discomfort is often evidence that a person is finally moving again. Meanwhile, emotionally dependent people become trapped in endless hesitation. They overthink everything. They seek constant validation. They wait for permission. And while they wait, life keeps moving. That's one of the saddest realities of adulthood. People slowly abandoning their potential because they became addicted to psychological safety. I think many people underestimate how deeply approval controls their decisions. The need to appear successful, the need to avoid judgment, the need to stay socially accepted. Those invisible pressures shape entire lives. Some people choose careers they never wanted because it impresses others. Some buy things they cannot afford because they want external validation. Some stay trapped in lifestyles making them miserable because they fear disappointing people around them. And eventually, they wake up living a life designed almost entirely around other people's expectations. That's not freedom, that's performance. And performance is exhausting, because pretending slowly disconnects people from themselves. The frightening part is that society often rewards this behavior. People applaud appearances, status, image, lifestyle. But external success means very little if someone secretly feels emotionally trapped inside their own existence. I honestly think one of the most powerful moments in a person's life is when they stop needing constant approval to trust their own direction. Because dependence on validation keeps people weak. It keeps them cautious, predictable, easy to influence. But people who become internally grounded start moving differently. They become calmer, less reactive, less desperate to impress. They stop building life around appearances and start building around alignment. That changes everything. Because once someone values freedom more than approval, their priorities shift naturally. They begin protecting time, peace, focus, health, long-term growth, not because it looks impressive online, but because they finally understand something deeper. A meaningful life cannot be built entirely around comfort. Some discomfort is necessary. The discomfort of discipline, the discomfort of uncertainty, the discomfort of growth, the discomfort of becoming someone new. And maybe that's why many people remain stuck for so long. Not because opportunity never appeared, but because the emotional cost of change felt too high. So they stayed where they were, year after year, slowly convincing themselves this was simply who they had become. But identity is not fixed. A person can rebuild themselves. A person can reclaim their focus, reclaim their standards, reclaim their future. But first, they must stop worshipping safety above everything else. Because eventually, life forces every person to answer the same question. Do you want comfort, or do you want freedom? And sometimes those two things move in opposite directions for a very long time. That's why courage matters so much. Not loud courage, quiet courage. The kind that allows someone to disappoint expectations. Leave familiar environments, start over, think differently, live differently. Because at the end of the day, many people are not trapped by lack of opportunity. They are trapped by the emotional addiction to what feels safe. And the most dangerous part about living that way is this: the cage rarely looks like a cage while you're inside it. Chapter 7. The wealthiest people protect their time like their life depends on it. A man spends 20 years chasing money. He works harder every year, sleeps less every year, pushes himself further every year. And eventually, he succeeds, at least from the outside. He finally has the income he once dreamed about, the house, the status, the lifestyle. But one evening, while sitting alone in a quiet hotel room during another work trip, he realizes something strange. He cannot remember the last time he truly felt present in his own life. Not relaxed, not distracted, present. And suddenly, a painful thought enters his mind. I spent so much time trying to build a better life that I forgot to actually live one. That realization hits many people later than they expect. Because when people are young, they often treat time casually. There's always tomorrow, always next year, always more energy, more opportunities, more life ahead. But eventually, adulthood changes the way time feels. Years start moving faster. Weeks disappear. Seasons disappear. Entire phases of life disappear before people fully experience them. And for many adults, this creates a quiet form of grief they struggle to explain. Not grief over failure, grief over absence. Absence from their own lives. Missing moments because they were mentally somewhere else. Missing relationships because survival consumed all their energy. Missing years because they spent them entirely focused on someday. That's why truly wealthy people eventually become obsessed with protecting time. Not because they are lazy, but because they understand something most people learn too late. Time is not money. Time is life itself. Money can return. Opportunities can return. Careers can recover. Businesses can recover. But time only moves in one direction. And once people deeply understand that, their priorities begin changing dramatically. They stop glorifying constant busyness. They stop wasting attention carelessly. They stop saying yes to everything. They stop living entirely in reaction to other people's demands. Because they finally realize every unnecessary distraction carries a hidden cost, a cost paid with life itself. I remember a period where I was constantly productive, but strangely disconnected from myself. Every hour was scheduled. Every day was optimized. Every moment was filled. But internally, I felt emotionally distant from my own existence. And eventually I realized something important. A full schedule does not automatically create a meaningful life. Sometimes people become so obsessed with managing time efficiently that they forget to ask whether the life they're managing is actually fulfilling. That's why many successful people still feel empty, because external achievement cannot replace internal presence, and presence has become rare. Modern life fragments attention constantly. Even moments meant for rest become interrupted by notifications, messages, stimulation, anxiety, endless mental noise. People are physically somewhere while mentally somewhere else. At dinner thinking about work, at work thinking about escape, at home thinking about pressure. And slowly, people stop fully experiencing their own lives in real time. That's dangerous, because a distracted life often feels shorter. Not biologically, psychologically. Days blur together, memories weaken, experiences lose emotional depth, and before long, entire years feel like they disappeared. That's one reason highly intentional people protect routines so carefully. Not because routines are glamorous, but because systems protect energy. The most disciplined people are often not relying on motivation at all. They reduce unnecessary decisions, reduce chaos, reduce distractions. They build environments supporting focus instead of constantly fighting against disorder, because eventually they understand. Freedom is not created by intensity, it is created by consistency. And consistency becomes easier when life is designed intentionally. That's why people who constantly rely on motivation usually struggle long-term. Motivation changes with emotion. Systems survive emotion. A person with strong systems continues moving even during stress, doubt, low energy, difficult seasons. Meanwhile, emotionally reactive people stop every time discomfort appears, and over years, that difference becomes enormous. Small, repeated actions shape identity more than dramatic, temporary effort ever will. That truth changes how successful people approach time. They stop focusing only on giant breakthroughs. Instead, they respect repetition, daily habits, focused hours, protected mornings, consistent thinking, because eventually a person becomes whatever repeatedly receives their life energy. That's why careless living becomes so expensive. Not immediately, gradually. One distracted year at a time, one exhausted season at a time, one emotionally absent day at a time, until eventually people wake up wondering where their youth went. That realization becomes especially painful when someone finally achieves financial success but realizes they sacrificed health, relationships, peace, or meaning along the way. Because wealth without presence still creates emptiness, and many people don't understand that until much later. I once heard someone say, "I spent my entire youth preparing to live later." That sentence stayed with me, because so many adults unknowingly make the same trade. They sacrifice health for money, time for status, peace for productivity, presence for achievement, believing eventually it will all balance out. But life does not always return what people postpone. Some moments only exist once. Some versions of yourself only exist once. That's why awareness matters now, not someday. Because every year people tell themselves, "I'll slow down later. I'll enjoy life later. I'll focus on myself later." And suddenly later becomes 10 years, then 20, then regret. The people who truly understand time begin living differently, not recklessly, intentionally. They become more selective about where energy goes, who receives attention, what deserves focus, which goals are actually meaningful. Because mature wisdom eventually realizes something simple but profound. A meaningful life is not built by squeezing more activity into every hour. It is built by becoming conscious of what deserves your life in the first place. That changes everything. Because once someone truly values time, they stop tolerating meaningless distractions, emotionally draining environments, empty relationships, endless busyness, goals that only impress other people. They stop living automatically and begin living deliberately. That shift is powerful, because deliberate living reconnects people with themselves again. Their attention becomes clearer, their mind becomes calmer, their future becomes more intentional, and slowly they stop feeling like life is something happening to them. They begin feeling ownership again. Ownership over energy, choices, direction, priorities, time. And honestly, that may be one of the deepest forms of wealth a person can ever build. Because at the end of life, almost nobody wishes they had answered more emails. Nobody wishes they spent more years, emotionally exhausted, inside routines they hated. People wish they had lived more fully, loved more deeply, been more present, taken more chances, spent less time surviving, and more time truly awake. And maybe that's the real reason the wealthiest people protect their time so aggressively. Because deep down, they understand they are not protecting hours, they are protecting their lives. Chapter 8. One day you will realize what you were actually selling. A man wakes up early one morning before work. The house is quiet. The world outside is still dark. And for a few minutes, he sits alone holding a cup of coffee, staring into silence. No phone, no music. No distractions, just silence. And somewhere in that silence, a thought quietly appears that he has spent years trying not to think about. Where did my life go? Not his career, not his responsibilities, his life. Because suddenly he realizes something terrifying. The years did not disappear dramatically. They disappeared routinely. One exhausting week at a time. One distracted year at a time. One postponed dream at a time. And deep down, he knows the truth. He was never just selling labor. He was selling mornings, energy, focus, health, peace, relationships, time, pieces of himself. That realization changes people. Because eventually, every human being reaches a moment where they begin understanding the true cost of the life they built. Not the financial cost, the emotional cost, the cost of constantly living tired, the cost of ignoring yourself for too many years, the cost of surviving so long that you forget what feeling alive even felt like. And honestly, I think many people avoid silence for this exact reason. Because silence forces awareness, and awareness can be painful, especially when someone realizes they spent years becoming responsible for everything except their own happiness. That's the strange tragedy of modern adulthood. People become experts at maintaining life while secretly feeling absent from it. They learn how to pay bills, manage stress, fulfill obligations, survive routines, but never fully learn how to feel connected to themselves again. And eventually, many people stop expecting life to feel meaningful. They settle for manageable stress, manageable unhappiness, manageable exhaustion, until one day they wake up emotionally numb and wonder why nothing excites them anymore. But numbness rarely appears overnight. It develops slowly. Human beings are not designed to endlessly suppress themselves without consequences. When people repeatedly ignore their curiosity, creativity, emotional needs, deeper desires, something inside them gradually becomes quieter, and eventually they stop hearing themselves at all. That's why so many adults secretly feel disconnected from who they used to be. Because somewhere along the way, survival became louder than identity. I remember thinking for a long time that adulthood simply meant sacrificing yourself permanently, that this constant pressure was normal, that emotional exhaustion was maturity, that feeling disconnected from life was the price of responsibility. But eventually I realized something important. There's a difference between sacrificing temporarily to build something meaningful and permanently abandoning yourself. Many people cross that line without noticing, and once they do, life starts feeling mechanical. Wake up, perform responsibilities, recover, repeat. No presence, no aliveness, no emotional connection to the future, just continuation. That's why awareness matters so much. Because the moment a person becomes fully honest with themselves, everything changes. The moment someone admits, "I am not truly happy living this way," that moment becomes powerful. Painful, but powerful. Because honesty breaks denial, and denial is what keeps people trapped the longest. People deny how exhausted they feel, how disconnected they feel, how much time they're wasting, how deeply they crave change. They keep postponing awareness because awareness demands responsibility. Once you truly admit your life is drifting away from who you want to become, you can no longer comfortably pretend everything is fine. That's why many people stay distracted constantly. Distraction protects denial, but eventually, reality catches up to everyone. Time moves no matter how distracted people become. Youth disappears. Energy changes. Priorities shift. And one day, many people realize they spent decades preparing to live later instead of actually living now. That realization hurts, because human beings naturally assume there will always be more time, more chances, more energy, more opportunities. But life does not guarantee endless postponement. Some people wait their entire lives for the right moment to start becoming themselves. And sadly, that moment never arrives because fear keeps moving the finish line. Fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, fear of judgment, fear of losing security. So instead, people remain trapped in familiar exhaustion because at least it feels predictable. But predictable suffering is still suffering, and eventually people must decide, do they want to spend the rest of their lives protecting comfort or reclaiming themselves? Because reclaiming your life requires courage, not dramatic courage, quiet courage. The courage to slow down, think honestly, question routines, change priorities, disappoint expectations, stop living entirely for survival. And honestly, that process can feel terrifying at first. Because many people built their entire identity around productivity and responsibility. Without those things, they no longer know who they are. But maybe that's exactly why this realization matters so much. Because underneath all the exhaustion, many people still carry a version of themselves waiting to come back alive again. The creative version, the hopeful version, the focused version, the version that once believed life could become meaningful. That version does not disappear completely. It becomes buried. Buried underneath stress, pressure, distraction, routine, fear, but it's still there. And sometimes all it takes is one moment of honesty for someone to begin finding themselves again. One decision, one change in direction, one refusal to keep living unconsciously. Because the truth is, nobody accidentally builds a meaningful life. Meaningful lives are built intentionally, through awareness, through focus, through difficult decisions, through protecting what truly matters. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this: your life will eventually become whatever repeatedly receives your time, attention, and energy. That means every day matters more than people realize. Every distraction matters. Every habit matters. Every repeated decision matters. Because little by little, those choices shape identity, and identity shapes destiny. That's why reclaiming your attention is reclaiming your future. Reclaiming your standards is reclaiming your future. Reclaiming your time is reclaiming your life itself. And maybe that's the real purpose of all this awareness. Not becoming rich just to impress people, not escaping work completely, but finally reaching a point where your life actually feels like it belongs to you again, where your mornings feel intentional, your energy feels protected, your future feels alive, and your time no longer feels like something constantly being traded away just to survive. Because at the end of everything, one truth remains impossible to escape. You were never just selling your time, you were selling pieces of your life. And once you fully understand that, you begin choosing much more carefully what deserves to receive what's left of you. Maybe the strangest thing about life is how slowly people disappear inside it. Not physically, emotionally, quietly. One compromise at a time, one exhausting routine at a time, one postponed dream at a time. And most people don't even notice it happening until years have already passed. That's why this conversation was never really about money. Money was only the surface. What this was truly about was ownership. Ownership over your attention, your energy, your direction, your future, your life. Because deep down, most people already know the truth. They know constant exhaustion is not freedom. They know distraction is costing them more than time. They know survival mode has slowly made their world emotionally smaller. But awareness alone changes nothing. A person can recognize the trap and still remain inside it for decades. That's why the real shift begins when awareness becomes action, not dramatic action. Small, intentional decisions repeated consistently. Protecting your focus, thinking long-term, learning valuable skills, spending less energy trying to impress people, refusing to waste years emotionally disconnected from your own existence. Because life is shaped far more by repetition than by intensity. And eventually, your daily patterns become your identity. That's why people who reclaim their lives rarely do it overnight. They do it gradually, one boundary at a time, one habit at a time, one mindset shift at a time, until eventually they no longer recognize the exhausted version of themselves they used to be. I think many people spend years waiting for external permission to finally start living differently. Permission from society, family, money, circumstances, fear, certainty. But real change usually begins much quieter than that. It begins the moment someone decides, I don't want to spend the rest of my life emotionally surviving. That decision matters, because time moves whether people become intentional or not. Years continue passing, energy continues changing, life continues moving forward, and eventually, everyone reaches a point where they must confront the same question. What was all of this for? Not just the work, not just the stress. The entire life. Did it feel meaningful? Did it feel alive? Did it feel owned? Or did it mostly feel like maintenance? That question becomes heavier with age. Because the older people become, the more they realize, money can return, time cannot. That's why protecting your life energy matters so much. Not just your productivity. Your life energy. The energy to think clearly, feel deeply, create, love, grow, stay emotionally connected to yourself. Without that connection, even successful lives can feel empty. But with that connection, even simple lives can feel deeply meaningful. And maybe that's the biggest misunderstanding about freedom. Freedom is not doing nothing. Freedom is waking up without feeling owned by your entire existence. Freedom is having enough clarity to decide what truly deserves your life. Because at the end of everything, your life becomes whatever repeatedly receives your attention. Your habits shape your days. Your days shape your years. And your years shape the person you become. That means every distraction costs something. Every repeated decision matters. Every year spent disconnected from yourself matters. Which is why awareness is powerful. Because once you truly understand what you've been trading away, you become much more careful about what receives your time. You stop treating your attention casually. You stop glorifying burnout. You stop sacrificing your entire existence for goals that leave you emotionally empty. And slowly, you begin building a life that actually feels like yours again. Maybe not instantly, but intentionally. And honestly, that may be one of the greatest forms of wealth a human being can ever build. Not status, not endless money, but a life that still feels alive while you're living it. A life where your future feels meaningful instead of repetitive. A life where your time feels protected instead of constantly consumed. A life where you no longer wake up feeling emotionally absent from your own existence. Because in the end, the goal was never simply to become rich. The goal was to stop selling your life too cheaply.